Hey, what is going on, everyone? The 415ers podcast back as always on the Odyssey Sports Podcast Network 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Evan Giddings and Marc Grandy with you. Download, rate, and subscribe to the podcast. 5 stars are much appreciated as we come to you on a Wednesday morning in between the bye week and the Chargers Sunday night football game in week 10 for the 49ers. First and foremost, Marc Grandy, sir, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, Evan. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well, man. Can't lie. I know I'm rocking the Cal Bears hat today, and they are down bad in both the football and to begin the basketball season, as you let me know this morning. So I appreciate you checking in on my California Bears.
UC Davis representing, am I right? Got a big win on the hardwood over them Golden Bears.
Yeah, something about the Aggies. Hopefully Cal wins 3 games this year. The 49ers, meanwhile, already have 4 wins this season, so they have done quite a good job so far this year. They are 4-4, a chance to go above or below 500 again this weekend. But Marc, we have a chance now in sort of this midway part between, of course, our midseason awards, which we talked about on Monday, as well as sort of an overall look at the season, to now take a look ahead to the second half. We'll, of course, have your preview episode coming up on Friday to take an in-depth look at the Chargers, but we're going to take a look at this episode as, kind of to what the team needs to do second half of the season, what some of the biggest hurdles are going to be. We're going to look at maybe a potential free agent signing for the 49ers that could be impactful. But first, we want to start where unfortunately a lot of the season has been kind of lost, and that is with the injuries. And there have been so many 49ers that have gone down throughout the first 8 weeks of their season. But now with the bye week, Marc, they get a chance to get healthy, hopefully get some players back on Sunday against the Chargers and then further on down the line. But the question that we want to pose and hopefully get the minds working out there of the 415ers faithful is, which injured 49er will have the biggest impact upon return? Because, Marc, there's a lot of choices at this point.
I mean, yeah, just no particular order to list a handful. I mean, you got Deebo Samuel, Elijah Mitchell, Arik Armstead, Kyle Juszczyk, Dre Greenlaw, who missed a game, Jason Verrett, who hasn't played all year and since very early last season, Javon Kinlaw, Juwan Jennings, Colton McKivitz, Aziz Al-Shire. I'm sure there's a few others that I'm mentioning. So it's not like, most teams where you ask, who's the one guy that you could really use back, and there's a surefire name at the top of the list. For the 49ers, I mean, you could probably make a case for 4 or 5 guys as being really, really valuable that could potentially turn, the tide of a season for the 49ers. So I think this is going to be an interesting conversation. I think probably top of the list has to be Deebo Samuel, just because of what he was able to do for your team last year. I mean, him and Christian McCaffrey together, we still haven't really seen it. They both played against the Kansas City Chiefs, but McCaffrey only had 10 touches in that game. When Deebo was out with an injury against the Rams, of course, McCaffrey went off and had a historic day, a receiving, passing, and a rushing touchdown, which has not been done since LaDainian Tomlinson in the early 2000s. So incredible performance there. What will it look like when those two are on the field together? That is really interesting. That's why Deebo Samuel probably is the first answer to this question, Evan. But as we'll talk about, I mean, I can make a case for a number of different guys, as I'm sure you can as well. That's just the quality and the depth that this Niner team has that they haven't really been able to lean on too much this year because of all the injuries.
Yeah, no, and hopefully a lot of these guys are going to be available coming back. So, I mean, guys like Trey Lance are obviously off the board. The seasoning and ending injuries we would love to have on the 49ers right now, we will not discuss. But of course, you mentioned the running game with McCaffrey being there. Obviously, Elijah Mitchell, hopefully, will get back in the mix as that secondary back and maybe more of the bruising type of bell cow that Shanahan will now have a different option to use in the backfield, along with probably Deebo as well as McCaffrey. But to me, the first place I got to look, Marc, is on the defensive side of the football. And I do think there are a lot of players that you can choose from at this point. But to me, you mentioned him in our last episode, but it starts with Arik Armstead on the defensive line, because as we've sort of laid out throughout some of the episodes this season, he creates such a different look for the entire defense, and especially in the run as well as the pass. And just looking to this weekend against a team like the Chargers, a team that doesn't necessarily run the football that well, but is sort of opportunistic and efficient when they do run the football. They're pass heavy. To me, he's kind of a perfect fit against a team like the Chargers. Should he, be available, may or may not be. But down the stretch of this season, they're going to need him if they want to compete for a deep playoff run because look, last year, I know you laid out kind of some numbers in our episode a few weeks ago where last year his shift from defensive end to the D tackle position kind of vaulted the Niners from a 14th rushing defense to number 1 in the entire league. That's the type of impact that he has. And he opens up everything for those extra pass rushers. Even Nick Bosa, who doesn't need much help by himself, but of course is much more efficient when Armstead is on the field. He allows the extra guys like a Menahue, maybe a Drake Jackson coming off the bench, Samson Ebukam to have more free reign to get to the quarterback. So to me, that's where I would start as far as who I think will have the biggest impact upon return. It's got to be Arik Armstead.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with you. I think for me, Deebo and Armstead are right up there with each other in terms of, most impactful once they're back out there on the field. What Armstead does, and I don't think he gets nearly enough credit, from outside of the organization, from the fan base, because what he does isn't necessarily stand out. It's not the sexiest thing. He's not going to rack up sacks like Nick Bosa does, rushing from the outside spot. But what Arik Armstead does, and you mentioned that shift from the outside to the inside of the line last year that kind of coincided with this season's turnaround. The other half of that was Deebo Samuel being more involved in the run game. That was the offensive change. The defensive change was Armstead plugging up the gaps in the middle of the defensive line. What that does is it stops the run. Arik Armstead is an elite run stopper. And what happens when you can stop an opposing team's run? They have to throw the ball. What happens when they throw the ball more? Nick Bosa has more opportunities to rush the passer. What happens when Nick Bosa has more opportunities to rush the passer? He gets more sacks and the Niners win games. That's the equation for the 49ers. It stopped the run. They have not been able to do that much without Armstead, but with him, that'll allow them to stop the run with more regularity. That will allow Nick Bosa to, pin his ears back and run after the quarterback, whoever it may be, force some interceptions, strip the ball out, sack them, push them behind the chains, give the ball back to the offense, and let Deebo Samuel and Christian McCaffrey and George Kittle and Brandon Ayuk and everyone go to work. That is the equation for the 49ers, and it starts with Arik Armstead in the middle. So I'm right there with you. He is hugely important, and I'm not certainly that optimistic that he will play this week against the Chargers. It's still up in the air. This episode coming out on Wednesday. Kyle Shanahan will talk for the first time this week later on today, so we don't quite know just yet. If I had to guess, I would probably say he doesn't play this week and plays the following week. But still, whenever he does come back, the 49ers, their defense is going to take a giant step forward because he, in my opinion, is that important.
Oh, he is. And another player that, to me, if he can, it's a player we haven't seen this year, but Jason Verrett, to me, is a guy that if he can stay healthy. Now, that's been the biggest if of his entire career since he was a first-round pick in 2013 out of TCU. When he plays, he is a Pro Bowl caliber corner. The issue is that he's had basically 3 different knee surgeries, and you're not exactly sure what's going to be left of him. But with the 49ers losing Emmanuel Moseley, in our last episode, I argued that because of the trickle-down effect of his absence, that is a position that is now barren, forcing Lenore to the outside, forcing Jimmy Ward to play in the slot, forcing a lot of guys not necessarily out of position, but positions in which they are not at full strength. If Jason Verrett can come in whenever he's available to, he came off the PUP list last week, potentially eligible to return against the Chargers. We will see his former team. If he can play at his former level, he is going to be allowed to basically slot in as the number 2 corner. And to me, that's another place where this 49ers defense can also take a next step. So, I know we're looking at the defensive side of the football. Getting Deebo Samuel is first and foremost offensively to me, but to be able to shore up first the defensive line with Armstead, and then having Jason Verrett eliminate kind of that domino effect of everyone kind of having to play out of position on the defensive side of the ball in the secondary. If he can come back and be healthy, to me, Mark, that's another big impactful player that could return and alleviate some pressure all around the defense.
Yep, I agree with you. And you mentioned or took him off the physically unable to perform list. We'll see if he is able to go against the Chargers. As you mentioned, it could potentially be a revenge game for him, as he's a former Charger. But also this week, the Niners, they opened the injured reserve practice windows for linebacker Azeez Al-Shire, offensive lineman Colton McKivitz, and running back Elijah Mitchell. So those are three others to consider. What that means isn't that they will play this week. It just means that when they did open those practice windows, which was yesterday, Monday, a couple of days ago, what that does is it gives the 49ers 3 weeks' time, 21 days to activate them onto the 53-man roster. So it means that they're confident that they're getting close. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to happen for this week against the Chargers, but that's fantastic news because it's a big reason why, and on the last episode, I chose Fred Warner as my team MVP because there's kind of been a turnstile next to him, in his co-linebacker spot. Azeez Al-Shire has not played much this season with an injury. Dre Greenlaw did not play last game against the Rams. There's a pretty decent chance that he's back as well. So you can kind of look at the linebacker group, as a whole, those two guys coming back as one potential addition, and Dre Greenlaw and Azeez Al-Shire. We talked a lot about Arik Armstead, and you talked a lot about the corner position, Jason Verrett, but that linebacker spot next to Fred Warner is also hugely important because the Niners have had to rely on guys that they were coming into the season expecting mostly to play on special teams in Demetrius Flanagan-Fowles and Oren Burks. And they filled in well for the most part against the Rams, but having guys like Dre Greenlaw and Azeez Al-Shire back will certainly help the 49ers as well in the second half of the year.
Yeah, Dre Greenlaw, questionable at this point, went down against Kansas City. I am curious how they're going to sort of figure out that will linebacker position opposite Fred Warner, because although Azeez Al-Shire is a quality linebacker and throughout, I think the tail end of last season really demonstrated his worth for the 49ers. Dre Greenlaw quietly has been a very, very good linebacker this year and has maybe not been around the football as much as Fred Warner, but has had a couple of games where he's racked up double-digit tackles, has been good in coverage, surprisingly, this season, and has basically, not made it so fans have really missed the presence of Azeez Al-Shire, although he is more of a thumper and a big hitter. So the 49ers are going to have some decisions to make as far as how they want to use both of those guys, and maybe the fact that both are sort of, banged up a bit. They can rotate them in alongside Warner and then hopefully be able to kind of coax them down the road, keep them fresh for a potential playoff run.
I think the other thing about Dre Greenlaw, you mentioned, kind of the thumper, a big hitter. He kind of makes those highlight plays a little bit more than Azeez Al-Shire. It seems like Azeez is more consistent. Maybe you don't notice him make a great play as often, but he doesn't make big mistakes. Dre Greenlaw, kind of the knack on him throughout his career. It's still early in his career, but the knock on him has been, he'll make good plays. So he'll deliver a big hit. He'll make wide receivers question coming over the middle, but he'll also get hit with a unnecessary roughness penalty. He'll hit someone too late out of bounds. He'll grab a face mask and cost you 15 yards. I think before he got hurt against the Chiefs as well, we've seen him take a step forward in that regard this season as well. So that's always good news. You want those big plays. You want the big hits, obviously not illegal hits. You want the hits that make offensive weapons think twice about running into the open field with you nearby. You want them to have that fear in their mind. And Dre Greenlaw does provide that. But up to, before this season, you're always kind of questioning if he's going to make a back-breaking mistake with a late hit or a shot to the head that might cost you a really big first down. And that has been the case in the past at times. So I think he's taken a step forward in that regard. And if he can keep that up when he comes back from this injury, it's only going to make the 49ers defense that much tougher because when they were, at full strength early in the season, I know they weren't playing elite offenses, but really the only thing that could stop them or slow them down defensively was self-inflicted wounds. And if Dre Greenlaw can get that part of his game under wraps, I think we'll see his game take a step forward, but the Niner defense as well continue to perform at a high level.
Yeah, and then on the offensive side of the ball, you mentioned Mitchell along with McKivitz coming off of IR, designated to return from IR this week. Those are guys that, to me, just add more depth to the 49ers. And on the offensive side of the football, it'll be interesting to see how they use Mitchell. I mean, even though he had a great season last year, at the end of the day, he still is a 6th-round pick. And you still do have, of course, now Christian McCaffrey, along with Deebo Samuel, who'll need touches out of the backfield. So I'm curious to see how they use him. On the defense, or pardon me, on the other guy on the offensive side of the ball who potentially could return and is technically a starter would be Kyle Juszczyk, who had that
Yeah.
broken finger against Kansas City, missed the Rams game. Kyle Shanahan said that there was a chance he could return. Right now, he's questionable for the Chargers game. But that's another guy who adds a different dynamic and a different wrinkle to an offense now just littered with different ways to attack you in about that 5 to 10 yard range, or maybe Juszczyk leaking out of the backfield. The Niners just have a bevy of options. Should a guy like Juszczyk be back?
Yeah, I think the fact that what we first mentioned use check, and good job on by you for remembering 15 and a half minutes or so into this episode. I think that just goes to it's nothing against use check. I think it just goes to show that the Niners have so many other injuries that are top of mind. Use check is clearly really important to this offense. I think I am just really excited. I think he'll have a gigantic impact, but I'm excited to see how Kyle Shanahan is able to scheme up, both Deebo Samuel and Christian McCaffrey along with Juszczyk on the field. Because Juszczyk, you follow him, he's going to lead you to the ball. I think it's going to be really interesting to watch and see how Kyle Shanahan, coming off of a bye week, has schemed things up and how he uses eye candy from motions of George Kittle and Kyle Juszczyk, how he uses Juszczyk as a lead blocker. Maybe he even uses Juszczyk as kind of a decoy. He's going up the middle to block for McCaffrey, who's in the backfield, and it's a fake handoff to McCaffrey, and suddenly Deebo has space down the right side because the defense is following both Juszczyk and McCaffrey to the middle of the field. I think there's so many options for Shanahan, and Kyle Juszczyk's versatility is a big reason for that. So good call. I'm also eager to see Juszczyk's return, whether it's this week or next.